So it's people. It's that simple. I mean, I always tell people I don't care if a person's 2 foot tall to 7 foot tall. If you can't deal with people, you're in the wrong business. So it's about people collaborating, working together, knowing how to communicate.
Welcome to Facility Maven here on Podbean, a podcast where your questions on facility and cleaning issues are answered by mavens in your field. This podcast is brought to you by FacilityMaven.com, where you can elevate your career with facility and cleaning supplies. Hello, everyone. This is Dave Thompson. I am your host of this podcast this morning. I am also the director of the Academy of Cleaning Excellence, and we welcome you to another episode. The last episode that we taped for you, that we did here, well, I should say, you're probably listening to a tape version, but we do have a live person on the air with us listening this morning. Good morning. Thank you very much for being with us here on Podbean Live. I talk about a number of different things on all of the different podcasts that I do. And, well, today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking with a person that's been in the cleaning part of school districts, maintaining the cleanliness of schools. But the main focus of our podcast this morning is facility maintenance. And facility maintenance takes on a whole lot of different things. You might have heard on our last podcast that Kenny talked a lot about communication. Mike Ward is with a school district up in, central, northern, somewhere up in Ohio. Let's just say it's colder there than it is where I'm at today. Mike Ward, are you there with us?
Yes, sir. Thank you, everyone.
And I'm sure that it's not 60 degrees where you're at today?
No, but they're saying it's going to get closed by the end of the week, so I'm really happy about that.
So, where in Ohio, are you in the northern? I know that you've moved around here quite a bit, keeping up with where you're at, Mike.
Yeah, so it's a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. So right in the center of the state is the easiest way to describe it. So, yeah. And
you, let's give the listeners, before we go too far, kind of a little bit of a history and a background of Mike Ward and your dealings with schools and facility maintenance.
So I worked in a school district for 21 years here in Ohio. Then I spent the last 10 years in a few different districts in Colorado the last 10 years. And now I'm back in Ohio. So this is year 31 for me.
You're 31. So has that always been in the custodial or the, let's talk about facility maintenance. I mean, I know that, mainly what we talk about is custodial, but facility maintenance takes up more than that.
Sure. So this new role I'm in, I've just been in it for about 4 months now. It is where I'm over custodial maintenance and our field tech's grounds department. So those two pieces, maintenance and grounds, is a little new for me. However, I've been around it for, 31 years, even though I didn't work in those specific departments. I've been around it and collaborated with those folks for many years. So I wouldn't consider myself an expert, but I know how to get things done. So.
And I think that's interesting. And the reason that I am enjoying talking with Mike Ward today, folks, is that, Kenny, that was on our last podcast, he was talking about all of the different positions that he'd held in a school district over 37 years or something like that, Mike.
Wow.
And, he said he's now in custodial, but he had been a superintendent of a small school district. He'd been a teacher. He'd been a principal. And he said now he's in the, custodial department. He says, I've looked at all different avenues, and there's one major thing that he found, whether you're a new person like yourself in this new role, or if you've been doing it for a long time, I want to see if you confer with him. What's that main thing that's key to all of these?
So it's people. It's that simple. I mean, I always tell people I don't care if a person's 2 foot tall to 7 foot tall. If you can't deal with people, you're in the wrong business. So it's about people collaborating, working together, knowing how to communicate, And, it's funny. I've been to different school districts, and the common theme when I ask what it needs improved, it almost always, the first words out of the school district's mouth is communication. We got to communicate better. We got to inform people. We've got to be on the same page. So that to me is the core. It's about people and communicating.
So, Mike, if communication is the biggest issue, what are we continuing to do wrong or not doing right? Or, I mean, I hear this every time, but if everybody knows that, then why are we continuing to have the problem?
Well, what I've seen, so I've worked for school districts with 11 schools all the way up to 175 schools. And you would think that those school districts that are larger have a harder time, but really they don't. I mean, it's just all about taking the time to really get on the same page. And I think we've got too comfortable with Zoom and FaceTime and, emails and those kind of things. And I think the lost art is just, even if it's just once a year, just take time to spend with your principals and school districts, that is, and, spend an hour with them and ask them how we're doing, and maybe walk the grounds, have them show us things on the grounds and in the building that, they're concerned about, that we don't even know they're upset about or concerned about. So you can't do that very well on a Zoom or FaceTime call or email. And when you can put a name with a face, you start building relationships. And to me, that's what public school districts all about, is relationships and people. And of course, the obvious, making sure kids are learning.
Well, yeah, it was interesting you said that, because that's what everybody says. Oh, and at the end of the day, by the way, we're here to, provide a safe environment for the students to learn.
Right. Right.
So,
So
so you're talking about the fact that we need to communicate better, but you mentioned several different forms of communication. We have five different generations working in our facilities management these days. Don't we need to use all of them?
yeah, I do. I think it's a combination of all. But I think that what's happened is we've just got too comfortable with the, in particular, emails. And then also, like I said, with the COVID situation, we've gotten really comfortable with the Zoom meetings and the FaceTime meetings and those types of things. And that just in-person stuff is just missing, I think.
So what's wrong with emails?
Nothing, but I just don't think they're personal enough. So for me, I like to have a name with a face. I got to know somebody. When you sit down with somebody, like typically, like you and I talked before we got on there, I said, can hear you sipping your coffee. And you said, no, it's tea. So now I know that Dave's a tea drinker, not a coffee drinker. Um, and, sometimes when I go to a building and I sit down with the person, they'll have, pictures in their office, and we'll have something in common. And, you start building that relationship, and they don't just see you as maybe that necessary evil, you know, and see you as part of the team that helps kids learn. If these guys aren't making sure the heating and cooling is correct, then my kids are going to suffer, because they're going to be more worried about keeping warm, or cold, or not be cold, in order to, instead of learning. So it's important that they know when they pick up that phone or send that email, they picture Mike, and they trust Mike, and they know Mike. And I think it's hard to really build that trust unless you get to know somebody a little bit.
So communication
And
is being comfortable with people.
part of it, I think so, absolutely. I think it's a big part of it. I mean, you can communicate even if you're not comfortable with people, but don't you want to have good, harmonious working relationships? And, again, it's funny you say that, because somebody sent an email yesterday and it was all in caps. And I'm sure the person just didn't realize they had their caps on. And so a lot of people don't understand that a lot of times all caps, well, not a lot of times, but it does mean that you're yelling. So the person on the chain of the email wrote back and said, why are you yelling? And it was just it wasn't even a yelling type situation, but that person took it as yelling. And again, if you have a little bit of in person, and that person would know the person sending the email, maybe they'd say, oh, I know that this person wasn't yelling. They must have just had the cap locks on. But if you're constantly just communicating with technology, I don't know that you get that same feeling.
But isn't that the same as whenever you're meeting with somebody and you, like you said, you're walking through the schools and you're looking at things? Isn't that the same thing as just perception? That's how somebody perceived that email.
Yeah, it is. It is, but that's kind of that one in particular is kind of a universal known thing that all caps means yelling, But
Now, you and I would say that, and you agree with it, and sure several of our listeners this morning would probably say the same thing. But
yeah.
there are people that don't realize this, or didn't realize that's what they did, like you said. So, what about the other forms of communication that we use? I mean, as a manager in facility maintenance, you have to be able to utilize all of them, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things I like to do, Dave, is I like to um, send out a survey, quick survey. I want to stress the word quick, a quick survey, because people don't have time to fill out, half
Three
hour
three
surveys.
questions or less, Mike.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, just quick surveys. And I thought I'd share a couple of the things that I asked the principals. So when you do a survey prior to meeting your principal, one of the things you want to make sure is that it's centered around identifying improvements, not bashing employees. So you don't want to ask questions like, "How does your head custodian do? Does he, that kind of thing, or your maintenance guy?" I mean, you do, but you don't want them using names. So, couple
So
examples.
you're actually recognizing people for what they're doing right, more of a positive reinforcement. So your meeting with the principal doesn't start out with a negative, right?
Right. I mean, that's the goal. So, one of the things I say, how would you rate your experience with the district's work order system? And, there's work order systems like School Dude, FMX, Tririga. There's a whole, slew of different types of work order systems. And then I say, rate this category as it pertains to your knowledge of placing, checking, and reading the status notes of the work order. So if a principal would check that as fair or needs improvement, then I know when I get my face-to-face meeting with them that I'm going to show them how the system works. And it's funny, I've had principals check that, and then I've showed them how, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't realize I could click on this and see what was going on. I didn't realize that the supply chain's the issue, and that's why we haven't got that new lock on that door or whatever." Um,
So,
so
am I to make an assumption here? Because hey, I'm not a person that uses those programs. So, from the outside looking in, does the principal always know how to use it correctly, or are we talking about the worker not knowing, or
so,
both?
but well, typically in a building you have a couple people that run your work order system, and that is typically your head custodian or facility manager, and then sometimes the office manager will also have access to that. But we always want the principal to have access to at least be able to get on there and look at status of work orders. So if your head custodian's on vacation and your office manager is not available or whatever, that principal knows that they can they got a principal calling, complaining about a pothole in the parking lot, but nobody's around to ask what's going on with that situation. And they can jump on there and see, we're waiting for, the supplies to, fill, or the company to come out, or whatever that might be. So
Hmm.
it just, and, I had a principal just last week. I did this with him, and he's like, I really don't need to know how to do that. And then I said, well, let me just show you real quick. And it was just two clicks, two clicks. I'm not kidding. He's like, oh, wow. And I said, so see, you can see right down here at the bottom of this work order that we're waiting on parts for this particular item. He goes, oh man, that's awesome. And he worked in a big high school, he's in a big high school. So that was really nice for him. So he doesn't have to, run all over the building looking for somebody, or, call on the radio and that kind of thing. He can just,
So this is another form of communication. You were
absolutely.
communicating to him, and then that way he saw the communication that uh, the the facility management department had between it, and that communicated a better thing for the whole school district at large.
Oh yeah, yeah, and not to mention that it keeps good notes and all those kind of things. That when it was completed, when sometimes there are things that are project works, and we'll put notes in there. Expect this to be done over spring break or fall break or winter break or whatever. So that's why those systems are so good.
Okay, so you mentioned three things. What was the other two?
What's that?
You mentioned three things when you do a survey.
Oh, so that's one example. Here's another one. Here's an area that I think that it's kind of struggles because they're outside, so they don't get in the building. So one of my questions on the survey is our field service grounds team is responsible for mowing, landscaping, maintenance, fertilization, parking lot, snow removal, not in Florida, of course, and 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 certain levels of pest control. Based on your experience, how would you rate the field services level of service? So, a lot of times they have no idea what we do. A lot of people think, oh, they just go in and cut the grass and weed whack. They don't know that we're checking fences, we're checking bleachers, we're, checking the tracks, the sports fields, all that stuff. So when I get in there to have that face-to-face meeting, if they say needs improvement, sometimes when I explain to them all the things that we do, they're like, oh, I didn't realize you did all that.
Yeah,
And,
and pest control might be keeping the field mice out of the athletic building.
Sure. And yeah, they just they get a new perspective. And then when I tell them that we're cleaning X amount of, or we're not cleaning, see, there's my custodial mind, but we're taking care of, X amount of acreage per field tech, their eyes light up. They're like, I said, so this isn't what you think, this is a little tougher than you think. And so a lot of times they'll get a new perspective. And then at the end of the survey, I'll just go over one more at the end that I like to ask them because I do want them to compliment our people, and they do. Um, what are we doing well as a department? Please include feedback for certain trades or specific employees. So we get a lot of that, Dave's an outstanding communicator. He does this, or, he takes care of us and those kind of things. But we're not looking to just sugarcoat everything. We also ask prior to that question, what areas of improvement do you see for our department? Please include ideas and suggestions that you feel will help us better serve you and your site. So, again, we of course we ask questions about each of the different trades. How are we taking care of you, and those types of things. But it's been a great tool, and I'm very proud of it. I've had principals say, "Wow, I've never had this happen. I've never seen a facilities director or manager come in and spend time and actually care what my thoughts are on how you guys are taking care of us." So. And I'd say the biggest shock, believe it or not, out of all of them, you always cringe on the one about HVAC because people are always calling, complaining that they're too hot or too cold. So, so I specifically made sure that I was very careful how I wrote this. How would you rate your experience with the HVAC team? Note, this rating does not include the rating of the HVAC systems, only the supports received. So, so again,
See, folks, it's all on how you communicate, and communication is words.
that's right. That's right. And I'll tell you, we have got good ratings on every single one of those so far, and that's been a shock to me because usually they misinterpret that question and they go straight to, well, we're always, Mrs. Jones is always too hot and this is too cold and da 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 da. But they actually have been really good at taking time to look at, and they've made comments. While our systems are a struggle, the team does an excellent job coming out, trying to take care of the problem, communicating what the problem is, and those types of things. So it's
But
been
Mike,
really
I
good.
think this gives kudos to you and your team because you've taken the time to put the communication down and given it thought. To put it out there so it's received in the right way. And as your example this morning was, the person that typed in all caps
Yes,
didn't take most likely didn't take the time to check their email before they sent it, so therefore it may have not had the correct meaning. And what you're saying here now is because you took the time to structure the survey the correct way, you got the correct responses, which I'm sure then communicated the right thing back to your maintenance team.
right, right.
So, folks, I really appreciate your time on this, Mike. Communication, folks. It doesn't matter what field you're in. Apparently, as we talk with individuals around the country, whether you're in custodial like Mike and Kenny have been or are now, or if you're maintaining the field or the HVAC system, it doesn't matter. It's still, whether you're working with the frontline worker or you're working with the principal or the superintendent, it's still communication.
Absolutely.
Mike, I'm sure that's not your only point. I'd be glad to have you back on the show to talk more about other attributes of a good facilities maintenance team. Any parting words before we leave you this morning?
No, I just, again, I think it's just you got to methodically think about putting yourself in the customer's shoes, no matter who that person is, and how you're going to best serve them. And the best way to do that is find out what you got to improve on. And there's no better way to find out than ask.
That's part of communication, folks.
Yeah.
I want to tell you that I have 2 questions, and Mike doesn't know these are coming. So we'll see how he answers. If you've listened to the podcast before, you might know these questions here. Mike, where were you born?
Columbus, Ohio.
Columbus, Ohio. See, he's back to his old homeland there again. And what is on your personal bucket list for this year?
Get back to Universal Studios.
Get back to Universal.
I love that
place.
place.
Get back to Florida.
That's right.
You've had enough of that cold weather, huh?
That's right.
Folks, there's a reason that I asked the 2 questions of each one of my guests when they first come on our podcast. And the reason is because it doesn't matter where you actually were born, because we all have to have a start. Where you're going, what you're going to be doing this year, or where your end of life is yet to be decided. It's the journey in between that makes a difference. What we'd like for you to do is consider to make that journey healthy, positive, and proactive. Thanks for listening to our podcast this morning. You can check out all of our podcast notes, where we're broadcasting from, who sponsored us, all of those good things. Please like and share. That's how we on podcasting get a following, and we're glad that you followed us today. Thank you to the people that came on live today. We appreciate that, you listening in. Mike, I'm sure we'll have you back on the show if you're willing.
You betcha.
Thanks for your time this morning.
You're welcome.